joined by Dr. Jim Mulshine and Dr. David Yankelevitz. Thank you so much for giving up your time to talk to us about quantitative imaging. First of all, could you please each introduce yourselves as well, and kind of what your role is and what you do on a day-to-day basis. Let's start with you, Jim.
Yes, hi. I appreciate being here. I am a professor of medical oncology at Rush University. I also happen to be vice chair for research at Prevent Cancer Foundation. I've been on the board going back to my days. I was 25 years at the NCI, and during that time is when I got involved with the Prevent Cancer Foundation. And I've been involved with lung cancer studies for the last 40 years. And I did a lot of developmental therapeutics in lung cancer. We treated advanced disease. We didn't cure anybody. And so we kind of stepped back and said, how do we change this dynamic? And imaging emerged and been with it for the last couple of decades.
I'm a radiologist currently at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York City. I specialize as a radiologist. I'm really very focused, and I specialize in lung cancer, in particular reading diagnostic scans and doing percutaneous lung biopsies. I was part of the initial group that started lung cancer screening back in 1992. When we first came up with the idea to do this, and I've watched the program grow. I was part of the original group called LCAP, the Early Lung Cancer Action Program, with Claudia Henschke, and we really started it, and we've watched it grow, and now it's become sort of current standard. And I have been involved with the Prevent Cancer Foundation in this conference since its inception, and have watched its impact and seeing how it's influenced the way we look at lung cancer and early lung cancer in particular.
So let's start at the basics. What is quantitative imaging? What does that mean for the layman? David, if you want to start.
Sure. Imaging for a long time has been pictures and nice pictures. And the focus on imaging for a long time has been, how do you make the images more visually appealing? And everybody knows what a CAT scan looks like or an MRI. But the real power in imaging ultimately will come from being able to measure things, and especially to measure things accurately and precisely, because so much information can be obtained in there, especially things like change over time, or if you're measuring to put in a device. So the idea of quantitative imaging is really to understand how well you can measure things, and then work towards improving your ability to measure things.
What role does that imaging have specifically in early detection and cancer prevention?
Excellent question. It relates to the fact that the ability to discriminate small objects has really improved with the current generations of imaging tools, such as CT, which we use in this setting. And so in clinical medicine, cancer used to be detected quite late, and it was large, about the size of a peach. And at that time, there wasn't anything we could do really about that disease. Whereas now, with the improved resolution, we can see things at the level of the size of a pea. And discriminating something at the size of the pea in a way that you're confident about it is really hard. And so we have, through computer processing and other tools, been able to get much more confidence about changes in the boundaries of small objects. Those changes are critical because they influence how we manage that individual. Who do we say, oh, you can come back next year, we got something, we're going to keep an eye on it, but please, we feel good about you coming back next year, and we'll still be able to see things before we get to a critical stage. Compared to somebody whose object of interest has moved beyond the size of a small pea, that we feel we have to intervene with invasive medical diagnostics to determine if there's a probability of cancer. And so having that kind of resolution in CT, which has only been available for the last decade or so, has been transformative in allowing us to successfully find on a consistent basis these early curable cancers.
So with that in mind, obviously it's very important to have these screenings to try to get early detection and prevention, and accuracy is something we actually focused a lot in one of the other interviews we've done so far. But in a world that's very, at this point, distributed, we have the internet, we're able to talk with whoever we need to at whatever time. Why do we need a workshop like this? Why do we need to gather people together remotely and locally in order to talk on a topic like this?
It's a wonderful question, and I often think about where things really get done, and my impression is, to an extent, it's correct. People can zoom in and see the workshop, and that's great. But my impression is, and it keeps reinforcing, is that the real action comes when people get together. There's nothing that can replace the sidebar conversations, even getting together after the meetings, conferences during the meetings, little breakout sessions where the interactions occur. That's where I find all the major progress goes. Otherwise, you can just read the articles at home, you can listen to it the next day. But I have seen this all my career. This is where things happen.
And I have to imagine as well, because I've heard that time and time again today, that everybody said it's the conversations of bringing passionate minds together that end up happening that generates new ideas. How much of that is also just everybody in this field is running very busy lives, and setting aside time to do that kind of thing is going to maybe generate some new ideas, generate some new paths forward, or some other forms of research that need to get done, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do see that. But let me go back to the question of David's comments, because I think it addresses your question, why this and what's important. So we started this conversation shortly after David and Claudia worked with their group and published their paper in Lancet in 1999 that showed that they could consistently find early stage curable lung cancer in high-risk groups using CT. And so we talked with other people about this opportunity. And there was a core of us, and we got together in another meeting that included David and I and Rick Avila, who has been involved in various presentations to the Awesome Gamers, and then another colleague who was the algorithm development head for Siemens in Germany. Rick was the head of that algorithm design team at GE, the computer vision team at GE, David and I. And in conversations, it was clear that computer vision was going to allow all kinds of innovation, transformative, profound changes. But the barriers in going from conceptual, yeah, we can do this, to moving that out into application across the world in every kind of possible clinical setting was just inconceivably complicated. And so we thought that we needed some kind of forum where people that were thinking about doing that could get together and share best practices and share concerns about, this is killing us, this is the bottleneck that we got to go after. And that all of us realizing that we're all looking at the elephants from different perspectives, and none of us can push the elephant in a different direction without some kind of shared interaction. And so this is a shared interaction forum for these kinds of conversations. And over the last 19 years, we talked about this idea for several years before we could actually move it into being, and we started in 2003. And it's just really been remarkable how many different catalytic things we've been able to throw into the hopper and move a little bit forward. Collections of images, all kinds of concerns about advancing the possibility that not only we're going to deal with lung cancer, but there's this other thing out there, emphysema, that we see at the same time, and maybe we can start doing that consistently, because it greatly enhances the value of the information to the individual, and other things like that.
Yeah. What kind of, and this is kind of an easy slam dunk answer, but how has Prevent Cancer Foundation helped aid in making conversations like that possible, or making gatherings like that possible?
I can mainly talk about this workshop, and Jim will tell you probably even more about some of the other things that Prevent Cancer does. In terms of the lung cancer and this workshop, it's brought together people that are committed, that are really dedicated to this issue of lung cancer and how to find it early. You have to sort of step back for a moment and just say, this is the number one cancer killer. I mean, it is by far the biggest target that we need if we want to make an impact on cancer in the world. And this approach, the lung cancer screening, is clearly is capable of making that impact. So we have to figure out how to make it really happen, and make this technique as robust and penetrate out into the community as much as possible. And this workshop brings together all the different components, from the imaging people that read the scans, from the people that develop software, to the people that develop public policy, to the people that do reimbursements. All of them that have a real passion come together at this forum. And I can't think of anything like this. And I go to lots of meetings, and I'm invited to lots of meetings, but I don't spend anywhere near as much time in terms of thinking about this meeting, being involved in the planning of each of these meetings. I mean, this is a year-round effort. It's not just hey, I'm going to a meeting. We're thinking about it. We're having meetings every couple of weeks, planning and discussing. So I think there's just nothing like this in terms of, what it's capable of doing.
So I've been involved. I was at the NCI for lots of years, and I was involved in lung cancer all that time, back in the 1980s forward. And I was a consultant to the British academic societies in terms of deciding strategic plans for English lung cancer research. And I met there a fellow, John Fields, who was at the time thinking about setting up a research institute in Liverpool, the Roy Castle Foundation. And they were thinking about what they could do, and they were thinking about, what about early detection, this, that, and the other thing. So we got involved in that. And as a result of that, we worked with the Roy Castle Foundation, and it turns out at the time, the wife of the Prime Minister her father died of lung cancer. And they were very concerned, and they wanted to do something for lung cancer. And so this was an idea that was bounced across, in one of our meetings. And I brought it back to Bo, and they said, they want to do something about lung cancer. What if we have a workshop? This is in the year 2000. This is going to be a millennium meeting about the opportunities for lung cancer in the new century. And it wound up being all about, it was in Washington, it wound up being all about lung cancer and lung cancer screening, the possibility of it, in light of the fact that they had just published a seminal paper on detection. And David was at that meeting because of the Prevent Cancer Foundation. There was a request from the Prime Minister to then President Bill Clinton to have this meeting in Washington. And so the Roy Castle Foundation co-sponsored this with the Prevent Cancer Foundation in Washington. We brought all the experts from everywhere in the world to the Executive Office building to have this session. We invited the director of the NCI, and we presented him the opportunities of having lung cancer screening as a public health tool. He heard it, he was very impressed, and at that meeting, Prevent Cancer sponsored meeting, he committed to the NCI doing a validation study to demonstrate this in a rigorous way, to evaluate it in a rigorous way, to decide whether or not the U.S. will go forward with this as a service. So that happened. There was a 2 or 3 year period of studying. We had, they invited experts from all over the world to design the trial and make it bulletproof and this, that, and the other thing. And it turned out that the first analysis to do that study was going to be over $1 billion in 10 years. And it went up the chain, and they said, whoa, we can't do that. And it's not quickly enough. They were afraid that if it took 10 years to do the study, that practice would either get established or get discarded before we even had a chance of knowing whether it worked for real. So that director moved on before he could implement the study. The new director coming in to be the head of the NCI, Andy von Eschenbach, was a colleague of Bo and others, and a very good friend of Don Coffey, who was then the president of the American Association of Cancer Research. And Bo decided, we discussed the possibility of screening, that we had to make sure that the director was aware of this opportunity. So before, a month before he ever came to Bethesda to be head of the NCI, we had dinner at Bo's house with Bo's husband on a Sunday night with Don Coffey, and his wife and my wife, and with the new director of the NCI, Andy von Eschenbach. And we talked about a lot of things, but the central focus was, we have this opportunity. It's not going to happen unless we do a rigorous randomized trial. Andy von Eschenbach was all over it. He was very familiar with the issues. He was a urologist. He was very much interested in early detection of prostate cancer. He said, we got to do this. And so he asked to assemble all the key players. First month he was there, he had the meetings. Everybody kind of came together on a plan, and it was executed. It was $250 million to do that trial, but it was a more accelerated timeline. And that's how it happened. It was through meetings and stuff and interactions of this foundation in very strategic ways. So it's kind of remarkable. And since then, it's been a question of how to keep moving it along. And that's what this workshop is about.
I honestly had no idea that lung cancer screening was that new, relatively speaking, right? It's the kind of thing where for me, that's existed for a lot of my life, right? And so you hear about CT scans, and you hear about being able to detect things, but you think that it's even older than it really is, and it's shocking how much has progressed over that time. Jim, as somebody who's been with Prevent Cancer Foundation for a very long time, how have you seen the impact of fundraising opportunities like Awesome Games Done Quick, for example? How has that impacted Prevent Cancer Foundation's ability to help move these kinds of projects and research and grants and whatnot along?
It's really a privilege to talk about this, because there's two levels of impact of Awesome Games relative to these issues. The first is the fact that we're taking imaging, which has arisen from gaming in terms of the analysis of the data, to move it from something that took place in a building that had, server after server after server that would process something for 2 weeks to get one answer. And that's kind of what was happening in 1970 when they made the first CT scanner that got the Nobel Prize. They take a picture of a brain, they analyze it for a month, and they come back and, here's the results, to having it available, so it's a gaming thing. And to have the resonance with the membership of your group to say that what we're doing is important to them and they're going to support it is incredibly important at just a conceptual level. The sum of money you put together is very impressive, but it comes from small contributions from all over the world. It's just an amazing validation of the importance of the directions that we're pursuing. That's one thing. The next thing is, then we get the big check. What do we do with it? Well, we've been in dialogue with your leadership, thinking more about global health and global prevention. And part of that money goes into funding projects across the world in general prevention. And part of it's gone into funding imaging studies related to lung cancer screening. So now we're talking about quantitative imaging. Quantitative imaging is so important in terms of this advanced medical practice because it provides the scaffolding for reliability so that Siemens, when they deconvolute all their data, and GE, if we bring quantitative dimensions into it and we say this is an inch and this is a mile, everybody's got the same language because we're very early in this. There's no standardization of anything. And there's no possibility of standardizing AI so it can be used across all these different platforms so that in a clinic and a hospital, everybody gets the same results. Quantitation is the foundation of that. And so that's very important, and it comes out of the kind of things that you funded. For instance, in Europe, which is kind of behind in screening and stuff like that, your funding has created the opportunity to put in phantoms to allow the standardization of quantitation across all of Poland as they implement their national screening programs.
It's like having like an atomic clock that everything syncs to, basically, right?
Exactly. And that's going to be, what they're doing there is going to become the footprint of what they're going to be doing across Europe. I mean, David's very much involved in this in a direct way.
Well, I would add on to that, the whole idea of developing the atomic clock, a ruler in the scan, so that you have something, especially when you're talking about measurements, you really need something to compare to. So this idea has been very much supported by Prevent Cancer Foundation, and they have calibration devices literally all over the world. China, Poland, Spain, France, all over the United States, Canada, and it's really starting to break through. This will become the gold standard for quantitative imaging, to be able to calibrate the scans. I have no doubt, and this is something that was born out of Prevent Cancer Foundation. I also just think it's important to understand that foundations like this fill a very important role. You know, research requires funding. We all understand that, and you have to pay for various things. And when you go for funding, there's many routes. You can go to the big organizations like the National Cancer Institute or whatnot, but they don't fund the really innovative stuff like this, small projects, really innovative, that things kind of grow out of. And that's where foundations really play a major role. And Prevent Cancer Foundation has done this exceptionally well. I know lots of foundations. I can't think of any foundation that does it as well as Prevent Cancer, where they really use their money and put so much of what they have into funding, promising research with young investigators to move things forward. And I think that's just a wonderful area. It allows, lots of new ideas to blossom. And I think we've seen that happen in so many areas related to quantitative imaging here.
How about Artit's project?
We actually just spoke with Artit right before you. Yeah, we got to hear a lot about the working in the very niche and working kind of looking at things that seem very kind of small and in the margins, but have such a wide impact. If you can make scans more accurate and know this means come back in a month, this means come back in 3 months or something like that.
Yeah, but the image collection that he's collected with David and others is making sure the atomic clock is telling the right time.
It's as I said earlier, CT scans have primarily been built for radiologists to look at and see pretty pictures. And what makes it appealing to the eye may not make it good as a measuring tool. When you're trying to measure, especially for lung cancer, one of the main areas is to measure change. And you want to know if the change is real or not. And that's the problem. You can measure the same, you can scan a person who has a nodule, you can scan them one time after another, 4 or 5 times. If you were to do that and measure the nodule, you get 5 different answers. And if you're trying to measure whether a nodule is growing or not, and you don't know what the real size is, it's impossible, because now you have a time 1, and then if you rescan the person a month later and you have all kinds of variability, so you don't really know. So everything about measuring is really overcoming measurement error. And understanding how you can quantify that is the absolute key, not just for lung cancer, but this will ultimately be for any measurements. And so the work that Artit's doing is setting the stage for understanding how to incorporate measurement error into decision-making for when to get the next scan, how do you determine whether it's growing. Unbelievably important, and this is the kind of thing that a foundation like Prevent Cancer really can pick up on quickly. It's not and get these projects off the ground, and then eventually it will lead to other sources of funding and whatnot. But these kind of smaller pilot studies are incredibly important. I think so much progress gets made that way.
Well, thank you both so much. I do want to leave just a little bit of space here if there's anything else that you think I missed that you absolutely want to get across, or if you just even want to use this as an opportunity to say something to the people who may be watching, whether it's something they should know about lung cancer screening, or if it's something that you just want to say to Games Done Quick fans or something like that. I like to leave a little bit of space here just in case there's anything else.
Yeah, this is kind of something that just happened today. We were up doing the presentations of the initial part of the workshop, and a phone went off, and it's Bo's phone, and it's sitting on the desk there. She's a little off at the podium, and it turns out that we turned off the phone. A couple minutes later, it was over, and she said, "You know who that call was?" I figured, spam or whatever. It was the director of the NCI. The director of the NCI had called. She is one of the young, promising prevention investigators who got their first funding for their postdoc to do a prevention research project through the Prevent Cancer Foundation. Wow. And so she's been somebody who's grown up. The Prevent Cancer Foundation, through their early investigator awards, has trained the current many of the current generation of leaders in the world of prevention, doing all kinds of stuff, including our now new director of the NCI. So it's been a very, very strategically important effort to bring focus to a place where we stay healthy and avoid disease.
It's sort of wonderful the way the world can work sometimes. Having an organization like Awesome Games understand or see the value in what we're doing. They're now one of the lead funders for Prevent Cancer. So and it's an organization that raises its funds through small amounts from lots and lots of people, and to just sort of put this together, to see how this came together, they saw the value in supporting this kind of a foundation. To me, it's really spectacular, and I just appreciate all of what your organization has done. It's really allowed so many things to move forward. And it's just a wonderful synergy.